Hello, I'm George Liston, CA. Welcome to Dialogue, a program that explores the world of ideas and issues in international affairs, history, and culture. In recent years, the world has witnessed a growing number of truth and reconciliation committees and national inquiries as troubled societies seek to understand and overcome past traumas. Whether the original sin was apartheid, communism, fratricide, or fascism, investigatory commissions, when effective, offer a way to document vital, though painful history and open new chapters of national purpose. But the path is not an easy one. In the case of Romania, for example, the Presidential Commission for the Analysis of the Communist Dictatorship endured attacks from all sides, a tortuous passage, and a challenging conclusion. It's an example worth considering as the number of societies with traumatic pasts grows apace. My guest is Vladimir Tismaneanu, Professor of Government and Politics at the University of Maryland. Vlad, welcome to Dialogue.
Thank you very much, George. It's always a pleasure.
It's always a pleasure to have you as a guest and as a friend and as a conversant. Today it's a special pleasure because you're not only a scholar of this and an author of a forthcoming book, you were the chairman of this commission we're going to talk about. So this is the best possible view I could ask for. So let me begin, Vlad, by asking you this fundamental question. President Basescu of Romania asked you to form the commission to look into the communist past of Romania. What was his reason? What was his goal?
Oh, it's a long story. I'll cut it very short. President Basescu is a man of now 57, who was himself a party member. There were 4 million party members in Romania for a population of 22 million, so you understand that was a very formal affiliation. He was never an apparatchik, a member of the secret police or anything like that. And there was enormous pressure from Romanian civil society, from civic activists, from, let's call them memory activists, for the president to address the past, to look into what happened and come with a public official condemnation of the dictatorship and with an apology for whatever happened on behalf, in the name of the Romanian state. This happened in other countries. It happened in Chile with President Patricio Aylwin apologizing in the name of the Chilean state to the victims of the Pinochet dictatorship. It happened in South Africa with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It happened in Salvador, and it didn't happen in any of the ex-communist countries with the exception of Germany. Like East Germany disappeared as a state. There's no West Romania to absorb East Romania and create and give judges and independent historians and so on. So part of the problem is that the pressure from the civil society was very intense. The second problem is that before that it was quite difficult. And I'll say just two things which I think are quite important. Romania is the only East Central European country that broke with communism via a violent revolution. Next year we are going to have the anniversaries. Over 1,000 people died during the revolution. They are victims. It was not velvety, it was not gentle like the East German Revolution. It was extremely turbulent, extremely spasmodic with the consequences that we know. The president who was in charge after the revolution, Mr. Ion Iliescu, who is an ex-communist and who is still very influential in Romanian politics, had zero interest to address these issues, or very little. Let's put it this way. He said, let bygones be bygones and let's look ahead. Second, so you had the lack of political will of the first successor president of the communist regime, the abysmal regime of Nicolae and Elena Ceausescu, executed on December 25th, Christmas Day, 1989. The second thing, who would do it? The composition of a commission is one of the most critical elements.
That's exactly it. That's an excellent point. I want to get to that too, the composition, because you had to bring very diverse elements together to form this. But one thing leaps out at me from your answer. Vlad, you mentioned very prominently civil society forces this question. Let's get to the truth. But here's the question. It's this is April 2006. You're going to begin this work.
Correct.
December 2006, you present a report, and that's a tumultuous occasion.
Yeah.
But that's
covered by the New York Times.
Exactly. And I remember reading the articles. But 2006 is 17 years after, the fall of communism. Why does it take so long to get to this point?
As I said, part of it was the lack of political will, lack of interest on the political elites, those who were really in charge, the true, makers and shakers of the political deals in post-communist Romania, who are still very much linked to the communist past. Part of it, which I learned during the activities of the Commission, is that you needed the expertise. We'll discuss the composition later of the Commission. We had 18 members of the Commission and we had something like 28 experts. The experts in reality wrote most of the stuff. I mean, the Commission, the commissioners who worked pro bono, I have to emphasize this, neither I nor any of the commissioners received a single penny for doing that. I used my research semester from the University of Maryland with the permission, gratefully to my chair and to my president they gave me. The experts, however, are young. We didn't have them 10, 15 years ago. The young historians, young political scientists, untainted by the past, who cannot be suspected of being ex-secret police informers. I mean, the secretary of the Commission, a man who is going to be here at the Wilson Center very soon with a conference we have on 68, the anniversary of 1968, Cristian Vasile, he's 33. Now,
so, in other words, you had to wait for a generation of academics to sort of mature?
Would have both the competence and the credibility.
And the objectivity.
And exactly. And who cannot immediately after that. We had one case which was, basically it shook us at the beginning. A very well-known historian who was a member of the Commission, who was a professor in a Western university in Central Europe, and who resigned, and it turned out that as a young man, there were really heartbreaking stories. When he was 16, he had been recruited and blackmailed by the secret police. When he was a high school student, that must have been in 1972 or 73 or something like that. Okay, this guy in the meantime had a tremendous career. He's a great scholar and so on. So at the moment he joined the Commission, immediately blackmails coming from the forces, let's call them, of the old. And he resigned.
Well, you know, that example, though, of this very promising, talented young man facing the blackmails, that, I think, for viewers, gives a very clear example of the kinds of pressures that are being brought to bear on this Commission and on its participants right from the start. Tell me this, though, because I'm very curious about this. You give us a very good sense of waiting for this generation of experts to be available, and they were to you. Tell me about those 18 members of that Commission right now, though. What, just briefly, what's the breakdown? Who were these people? Where did you get them?
Okay, President Basescu was aware of my expertise in East European and European communism, and my book translated into Romanian was published initially by University of California Press, Stalinism for All Seasons, which I finished at the Wilson Center when I was a public policy scholar. Again, my gratitude to the Wilson Center. And he read that book, and so he said, okay, I need somebody for this commission, because people said initially, why does he need a commission? Why do we need for condemning a communist dictatorship that everybody who is in his, has good faith would accept that the regime was criminal and illegitimate? Why does he need a commission? Because I'm not working for the current generation that still remembers. I'm working for, or this commission should produce a document that would convince people in 10, 15, 25 years. And produce a document that, of course, can be improved, and we don't pretend, although it's 900 pages.
So what kind of people do you need to do that?
You need experts, and you need people with the background that is respected and cannot be questioned. So you need a combination of competence, as I said, and moral credibility. So it's always in all the, I looked into 21 countries in these truth commissions and so on. Probably there are more, but the ones that I worked a little bit on. And that has always been a very contentious point. Who has the moral authority to condemn the dictatorship?
That's an excellent way of putting it.
It's a very complex issue. In my case, everything was brought up. I was born, and I never made a secret, my parents were communists and they fought in the Spanish Civil War. They were disenchanted, and I grew up very disenchanted. I broke with communists, but I was born in a left-wing family. Okay, so I didn't choose the family I was born into. I mean, it's life that chose me there. Okay, so but that was brought up all the time. Look who is condemning communism. Then we had former political prisoners. That's a very important.
Former political prisoners.
Yes, and for instance, one of the members of the commission is a gentleman who spent 17 years in communist jails, and he's the president of the National Association of Former Political Prisoners. Then we have a young guy, younger anyway than this gentleman, who is an engineer and who did something. He was a hero of the anti-communist dissent. He was not a partisan in the mountains in the 1950s. 50s. But what he did, he distributed leaflets on his bike. He was going to people's, mailboxes and leaving anti-Ceausescu leaflets until he was caught. He was investigated, he was beaten, etc.
So you had people with direct experience
Exactly.
of what the regime had been.
And on the other hand, we had people who were national institutions, so to speak. There's a very important literary critic who is the president of the Romanian Writers' Union, for instance, whom everybody recognizes as a kind of tremendous cultural authority. We had philosophers, sociologists, so it was a combination. Some people reproached and said, in a way, you created a hybrid commission, and because of its hybrid nature, better would have been perhaps to go either with the moral authority or with the scholarly authority.
It's still very impressive, though, to have even this hybrid group, and I'm impressed by the fact that you sought people like yourself, basically. I mean, people with, clearly a strong intellectual background, but also a very personal relationship to the history that they were dealing with, and an objectivity about it.
My dedication to Stalin's for all citizens is dedicated to my now 13-year-old son. He was at that moment, whatever, 9 or 10. And I said, for my son Adam, who is named Adam for Adam Michnik, the famous Polish dissident. And I said, in order for him to understand the utopia his grandparents believed in, and to understand why it failed. So it's the story of a failure of a utopia. So another point which created a huge debate, because we said from the beginning, anti-communism is a very, very complex issue, and there are many shades in anti-communism. Our philosophical perspective, and that was, I assumed it very proudly from the very beginning. I informed the president, and he agreed with that. He gave me absolute full freedom and supported me. So I'm extremely grateful to him for that. Was that I consider myself a civic liberal. I believe in the values of civic liberalism. This is not going to be a condemnation of communism from the viewpoint of another totalitarian perspective. This is not going to say that communism was bad, but forms of anti-communism, a la Nazism or fascism and so on, were good. No. Any form of utopia that tries to diminish human dignity, individual rights, individual freedoms, is wrong.
Now, that's a very important point, because Romania has a very complicated history. So here you are, chairing this hand-picked 18-member committee, dealing with this presidential commission, looking objectively into Romania's communist past, with all that implies. But as I say, Romania's history is very complex. You know this much better than I do. Were there competing groups, Vlad, also looking back beyond the communist years with an interest perhaps in refurbishing the image of fascism or other things that had been in play? I'm thinking specifically of the Iron Guard era, the fascist era of Romania's history. Were there competing groups? In other words, was this a battle for the past?
Yes.
A battle for memory?
Yes, it's exactly what philosopher Jürgen Habermas all the time says. It's the public use of history. And it's basically, we were accused by groups that criticize us that we are trying to impose a unique vision of history. Nobody imposes. It's published, you buy it or you don't buy it. It's the only official document is the president's speech. The report is not an official document. It's the background for the president's speech, in which he indeed on December 18, 2006, when Lech Wałęsa was there, the former Polish president, the hero of solidarity, and former Prime Minister Filip Dimitrov of Bulgaria, and a few other very important people were there, former King Michael.
So you're not pushing anything?
No, we said clearly, this is basically judging the past from the civic liberal perspective. That's we assume our values, and the Guard, I mean, there's something called the New Right in Romania that organized demonstrations against us, who try to say, Romania, as you said, has a long history and a very, very convoluted one of the most, in a way, puzzling histories in the region, and God knows that the region is puzzling enough. We still have troops in the former Yugoslavia.
Right.
Okay, so the point was that some people try to say that the first 20 years of the communist regime, let's say between 1945 and 1965, before Ceausescu came to power and so on, Romania was dominated by foreigners, so it was a kind of foreign imposed dictatorship. By foreigners they mean Hungarian, Jews, Russians, you name it. After 65, Romanian regime became our regime. By challenging and exploding this myth, basically, really, we created uproar and negative reactions in that group. You know, what was the illusion? In a way, I'm reading now here, being the center and finishing this book, I'm reading so much about the other truth commissions. And I can tell you, my wife tell me, maybe you should have read them before. I said, no, it's better to read them after, because I would have been...
Were the opposition of these other groups with their vested interests, the general sort of persecution, if you will, that your commission may have suffered, was that a factor right from day one straight through? Was the entire, I guess, 8 or 9 months consumed with this kind of pressure?
Actually, it was
all the time?
Very nicely covered by Jim Compton in an article in the Washington Post about that. And so there were several articles in English. And let me tell you, another group, which is interesting because it's very much comparable to the commission in the former GDR, former German Democratic Republic, which they had the consensus of the parliament. Their commission, which is called the Investigative Commission for the Analysis of the Communist Party Dictatorship, more or less the same title.
Well, the German example is quite different. They were operating with a lot of support, right?
They had the ex-Communist Party and the so-called Linke, the so-called Left Party, which was, they produced a counter report. In our case, the only group that threatened us was producing a counter report, but they have never delivered. I'm still waiting for their counter report, was the Romanian Orthodox Church. You'd ask me, why? Because the church, while delivering a number of very impressive martyrs and people who died in prison, for reasons that go way back, since you mentioned a very complex history, the relationship between the Orthodox Church in Romania, Russia, Serbia, Bulgaria, the countries that were communized or Sovietized, is very different from the relation between the Catholic Church or the Protestant Church.
Was the church complicit in any of it? It was complicit.
I would say members of the church. I have to be
very fair.
But we had, like we are here at the Wilson Center, like 9/11 Commission, we had some documents were consulted by our members, as they say, for eyes only. So they couldn't take Xerox copies and so, but they could see. And members, high members of the Romanian Orthodox Church cooperate with the communist regime, and therefore you have the reaction of the church. I was called, that's the funniest thing, I was called Vladimir Tismaneanu heretic. I cannot be heretic, I'm not Orthodox. I mean, how can I be a heretic? You first have to belong to the church.
Yeah, but you know, when you mention things like this, and you're very clear right now at this moment, I'm sure you were clear in the report too, you're talking about, as you say, some members of the church, right?
No,
it's a very important distinction.
The only institution, George, that we considered, and here I took the position of the, with all due respect and all proportions being observed, the Nuremberg Tribunal, they looked into the SS being a criminal organization.
Right, but here's my point.
So the Securitate, the secret police, yes, institutionally is condemned. But not the party, not the church.
Right, but here's my point. Even with these distinctions, and they are the right ones to make that you just made, you're stepping on everyone's toes. It's really no wonder you're being opposed by everyone, because it seems to me that left, right, church, public, private, individual, collectivity, there was a lot of participation in this, a lot of blame to go around. So any honest report is going to offend everyone.
There is a statement. The Romanian communist regime called itself between 1947 and 65, called the Romanian People's Republic. And taking an image from a very famous French political scientist and historian, I said 3 letters, RPR, Romanian People's Republic, RPR, 3 letters, 3 lies. It was not Romanian, it was clearly not people's. It was not republic in the real sense, res publica. Charles King from Georgetown University reviewed our report, wonderful review, gave in Slavic Review, which is a major professional journal in our discipline. And Charles said, and I think he has a point, that he agrees with us that it was not people's, it was not republic, but the promise was for many people it was Romanian. So there was complicity, and by going into this and highlighting, of course, the immediate answer is, look who is speaking. Again, we go back into the attack. That's the reason of the intensity of the personal
Right, the personal involvement. But okay, now here's another thing that very comment right now makes me think. It was Romanian. It does involve a lot of people.
Absolutely.
Okay, all right.
It
involves people, but a lot of them, it would seem, or at least some of them, did things that should have legal consequences.
Yes.
Okay? In other words, there are probably people who one could argue should be facing justice.
Yes.
But they're not. They're in the public, And I'm sure they don't want to face
that,
justice.
And that really prevents
So you're
reconciliation.
Exactly. So I guess here's the question I'm coming to. I want to ask you to characterize the report very briefly. I know a report's a long thing, but just give me the thrust of it. What did it, what was the main argument it made? And then what's the effect of making that main argument, such a critical argument, when some of the perpetrators, many of them, are sort of in the audience?
Okay, let me give you very briefly. I promise to be very brief. Before our commission, forget about the German commission and truth commissions. We had another very important commission in Romania, which was formed in 2004 and delivered its report in 2005. It was chaired by Elie Wiesel, Nobel Prize winner.
Oh, yes.
It was the Commission on the Holocaust. The difference, which recognized the fact that in Romania there was a Holocaust and it was perpetrated by the Romanian army, Romanian police, it was not the Germans who did it. Okay. The difference between the Wiesel Commission and our commission, that immodestly some people force me to call it the Tismaneanu Commission, I prefer not to call it this way, the Presidential Commission, is that in their case, victims, perpetrators, and bystanders basically were dead or very, very old. In our case, victims, perpetrators, and bystanders were there watching us and being very involved. Okay, and the voices of the victims, I was very adamant in giving the victims a voice. Okay, what is the main argument first? That was the background, which I think is very important. So we are a second presidential commission, because these are the two traumatic events in Romania, 20th century Romania, the Holocaust and communism. You cannot separate the two, especially since the communist regime under Ceausescu appropriated many extreme right themes in its ideology.
Absolutely.
So they go hand in hand. Okay, that's the most important thing. Our thesis is that for a society to breathe freely, for a society like a human being to look not proudly but honestly and without sense of shame into the mirror in the morning, it is very important to know who we are, where do we come from. Otherwise we don't know in what direction we go. It's the famous Gauguin painting in Boston. Who are we, where do we come from, where do we go? I mean, it's basically that, and I think I quoted that. I said, this is basically a very important thing. So we have to, I use a very pretentious term, to exorcise basically the demons of the past. But the exorcism that we propose is not necessarily the one that would bring people into the dock and to create, tribunals and so on, and new Bastilles, as Michnik would say, but basically via knowledge. And via knowledge, we expected, and we still expect, some people to come, as former Prime Minister de Klerk in South Africa, some people, some former policemen in South Africa, or even in El Salvador, to come and said, I'm sorry. We have here at this moment at the Wilson Center a scholar from California, UCLA, Gail Kligman. She was a member of our commission. She's a distinguished American sociologist who wrote the most important book about the politics of abortion in Ceausescu's Romania. Viewers may not know, in Romania abortion was banned. There is the movie that got the Cannes Film Festival 432, which is playing, which is about that.
Remember that.
Go to the whatever Potomac Video or whatever and rent it. They have many copies. It's a great film. Okay, it's about precisely that. We have a whole chapter about the victims of this pro-natalist delusional policy of the Ceausescu regime. So basically this is the most important thing we wanted to achieve. And what did we achieve? Because people say, okay, it was just a symbolic, I heard it a lot in Romania. President Basescu achieved an electoral point, he made it and so on, but it's always symbolism. What next? Okay, there are a number of proposals, including something which is now discussed in Poland, and we proposed the same thing. The parliament was not very happy with our report, so we'll see. There will be elections in November 2008 for the parliament. Maybe a different parliament would have different views. We propose different things, including bringing the pensions of the former Securitate officers to the level, the average level. There are people who have pensions which are absolutely astronomical, and
Sort of a profit, really.
Absolutely,
And these Securitate, just for the sake of our viewers, these are the
secret police.
secret police.
Yes, the thugs. I mean, it's real
thugs
thugs
of the
absolutely,
regime
like the Tonton
have
Macut
pensions
in
that
Haiti.
are far above the other people.
Yeah, and they made it, and they okay. There is some, however,
Give me another concrete.
Okay, another very concrete thing is to introduce, like, for instance, they introduced this after the Wiesel Commission, the study of the Holocaust in Romania was introduced as an optional, initially, a topic in high schools.
Good.
And the same thing has been achieved, okay? So now, It's the beginning. 30 high schools in Romania, we have a textbook based on the report. Obviously 200 pages versus 900 pages, obviously addressed to kids who know very little about that, with pictures and so on and so forth. So they will study. So that's going to become an object of study and so on. They don't use perhaps some of our conceptual rhetoric, they don't use some of our moral rhetoric. They don't use things like illegitimate and criminal. That's an act of the state. That was the president's very important statement. Kids are asked to look into what happened and they will discuss it. So it's becoming public knowledge and public conversation.
Well, I'm very impressed by that, because here we have a report. This is sort of my summing up of what I've read about the report and our conversation. You know, that looked fearlessly into the past, produced a truthful accounting of what took place. And then I loved your statement about like a human being who looks in a mirror. You know, you have to understand your past and know where you were to have a sense of where you're going to go. So the report also fundamentally is meant to serve the future of Romania, and then has this very practical application in the schools and in recommendations like bringing those pension dash rewards for some of the villains back down. All of this leads me to ask you a sort of concluding question. Even a brief response on this will be helpful, because you're not just a historian, you're a man with a set of ideals and convictions who did this for those reasons as well. What's the importance of this in the more general sense, which we mentioned South Africa, Chile, all these places? How important is recapturing memory? I guess I just have time for one word, one sentence on this. What would you say?
Like a man, societies cannot live without knowing their past. It's basically, I always say what Václav Havel said, living in truth is the healthiest way of living one's life.
Beautifully said. Vlad, thank you. And I look forward to the book. You come back and talk about that. And that's our program. We appreciate your comments, and you can reach us at dialogue@wilsoncenter.org. I'm George Liston, CA, and you've been watching Dialogue, a co-production of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars and MHC Networks. Dialogue is also on the MHC Worldview channel, which is available to public TV stations nationwide. For more information, go to www.mhcworldview.org. Please join us again right here next week, and thank you for watching this week. Vlad, thank you. That was excellent.
Thank you so much.
You have a lot of passion when you speak.
The Art of Conversation, Dialogue at the Woodrow Wilson Center features 20 years of dialogue, distributed by the Johns Hopkins University Press, www.press.jhu.edu.